Welcome to the War Archive, where wars become stories. In the beginning, there was only stone, wind, and flame. Before Spain had a name, the Iberian Peninsula was a land carved by storms and silence, a wild corner of the world where mountains met the sea and the sea met the unknown. Long before kings and crosses, hunters painted the walls of Altamira with the image of a bull, broad, defiant, and eternal. Its dark shape flickered under torchlight, the first heartbeat of a story that would never end. Centuries passed like the turning of the wind. Tribes settled the valleys, carving homes into the rock and drawing gods from the earth. They herded cattle, smelted bronze, and followed the stars across the plains. To the east came the traders Phoenicians in purple sails, their ships creaking with incense and copper. They founded Gadir, a city of salt and silver. The Greeks followed building colonies where wine flowed and olive trees clung to the hillsides. Each brought a word, a god, a scar. Iberia became a marketplace of tongues, Iberian Celt Tartessian, a place of meeting and collision. But trade invited conquest. From across the sea came Carthage, the empire of merchants turned soldiers. They built walls and mines, forcing the land to serve their hunger. From these shores, a young general named Hannibal gathered his armies, his elephants, his vow of vengeance. When he crossed the Alps, he left Iberia behind as his crucible, and Rome, watching from afar, understood what this land was worth. The Romans came as they always did, with road and sword. They conquered, retreated, conquered again. For 2 centuries, the land bled, tribes rising and falling like waves. In the north, the Cantabrians fought to the death. In the west, the Lusitanians followed their rebel leader Viriathus until betrayal silenced him. Rome buried him with honors. Even their enemies, they said, had to be remembered. At last, the eagle banners reached every coast. Hispania was born not a nation, but a promise. Cities rose where villages had stood, Tarraco, Emerita, Augusta, Cordoba. Aqueducts carried water through the heat roads, bound the mountains to the sea. Latin became the language of empire, and the bull of Altamira was carved again, this time on coins tamed, gilded, and sold. Roman peace came slowly, but it came. For 400 years the land prospered. Olive oil flowed to Rome, marble to her temples, soldiers to her legions. Spain gave the empire its emperors Trajan, Hadrian, and later Theodosius, sons of this soil who ruled the known world. In their reigns, the peninsula became a mirror of Rome itself, proud, disciplined, and restless beneath the surface. But all pieces borrowed. The empire began to crack. Roads fell quiet. Villas emptied, gold grew scarce. The same mountains that once guarded Spain now trapped it. Across the Pyrenees came the Visigoths, warriors in fur and steel, drawn by the scent of decay. They found not a nation but a ghost temples turned to dust cities waiting for masters. Rome's light flickered and died, yet its shadow lingered. The Latin tongue remained, the laws endured, and faith, still fragile, began to take root. From the ruins of empire, a new order would rise. The bull of Altamira slept beneath centuries of dust, waiting for another age to awaken it. Its horns would gleam again under banners of gold, under swords of faith, and under fires no empire could contain. The empire was gone, but its echoes still filled the valleys. Broken columns lay half buried in weeds, and Latin prayers whispered through empty basilicas. Into this quiet came the Visigoth strangers on horseback, their cloaks dark with rain, their faces hard from exile. They did not destroy Rome's ghost. They married it. Led by King Adolf, they settled first in the northeast and later made Toledo their capital, a city built on stone and memory. There, under a Roman sky, they tried to rebuild order out of ruin. They ruled through law, not just the sword. They blended Roman code with Gothic custom, and as their scribes wrote new decrees, the Latin tongue endured. Their faith, too, changed pagan kings baptized in cathedrals built from marble, once carved for Jupiter. The empire of stone had become an empire of belief. The Visigothic kingdom was fragile, but it was alive. Councils met in Toledo's churches, bishops and nobles deciding the fate of souls and states in the same breath. Outside the walls, monasteries spread like seeds across the countryside. Bells rang where once there had been battle. For a moment it seemed the peninsula had found peace, but power breeds betrayal. The Visigothic crown was never secure. Every succession invited blood. Kings were blinded, brothers murdered, bishops exiled. Even as the kingdom Christianized its laws, it could not Christianize its ambitions. In the south, old Roman towns still thrived on trade with Africa. Across that narrow strait, a new faith was rising, swift, burning, unstoppable. By the dawn of the 8th century, Islam had swept across Arabia and North Africa, uniting tribes under one god and one banner. From the deserts of Morocco, their eyes turned north toward Hispania, the land of fractured kings. In 711, a Berber general named Tariq ibn Ziyad crossed the strait with an army of 7,000. Behind him, he burned his ships. "The sea is behind you," he told his men, "and the enemy before you." The Visigothic army met them near the Guadalete River. Their king Roderick glittered in gold armor, a remnant of Rome's pride. The battle lasted a single day. When the dust settled, the crown of Toledo lay in the mud. Roderick's body was never found. Some said the river carried him away. Others said the earth refused to remember him. City after city surrendered. Córdoba, Seville, Toledo all fell within years. Churches became mosques. Latin gave way to Arabic, and the call to prayer echoed where the Roman eagle once flew. Yet even in defeat, the Visigothic spirit did not vanish. A few survivors fled north into the green mountains of Asturias, where the empire's last spark still smoldered in the rain. There, beneath gray skies and the scent of pine, they built a small chapel and prayed for deliverance. They were few, poor, and forgotten, but they carried something the conquerors could not take: a memory of unity and a faith in resurrection. The world believed Spain had fallen. In truth, it had only gone to ground waiting to rise again. When the crescent rose above Iberia, it did not bring silence. It brought brilliance. What began as conquest soon became creation. From the ashes of the Visigothic world grew al-Andalus, a new civilization where faith met curiosity and power met beauty. Córdoba became its heart. The city shimmered beside the Guadalquivir like a reflection of paradise: white walls, flowing water, the hum of markets filled with silk and saffron. At night, oil lamps lit its bridges, and from the minarets the call to prayer drifted over the river like smoke. Here, beneath arches of red and white stone, the world gathered: Arab nobles, Berber warriors, Jewish scholars, Christian craftsmen. Latin, Hebrew, and Arabic braided together in the air. Knowledge became their empire. In the great library of Córdoba, shelves groaned under thousands of books: astronomy, medicine, philosophy. Scholars mapped the stars while poets mapped the heart. They debated Aristotle in courtyards where fountains murmured, and by night they watched the heavens turn through brass astrolabes of their own design. The air itself seemed alive with thought, but even paradise can fracture. The unity that had birthed al-Andalus began to thin. Dynasties rose and fell. The Umayyads of Damascus built their golden caliphate here, yet within centuries it splintered. Dozens of rival taifas, city kingdoms, competed for wealth and power. They warred, traded, and schemed, each convinced it was heir to the glory of Córdoba. The Christian kingdoms to the north watched patiently. In the shadowed valleys of Asturias, their faith had survived the storm. Generations had passed since Covadonga, yet their belief had hardened into purpose. The frontier between cross and crescent shifted every decade, yet neither side could destroy the other. For centuries, Spain became a living borderland, part Europe, part Africa, all contradiction. Within this tension, beauty deepened into melancholy. The poet Ibn Zaydun wrote of lost love as his city crumbled around him. The philosopher Averroes defended reason in a world sliding toward fear. Their words outlasted their empires. And in Granada, the last jewel of the South artisans built the Alhambra stone lace water, light a farewell to glory carved one arch at a time. Listen closely, and you can still hear it: the echo of footsteps on marble, the song of three languages carried by wind. Al-Andalus was never only a place. It was an idea that faith and knowledge could coexist, that conquest could give way to culture. Its fall would take centuries, but its light would never fully fade. In the north, bells began to ring again. The mountains answered the minarets. The long night of resistance was stirring. The land of harmony was about to become the land of holy war. In the mountains of Asturias, where the clouds hang low and the valleys breathe mist, a spark refused to die. The Muslims had taken nearly all of Iberia, but here in these wet green hills, a handful of warriors clung to their faith and their memory. Led by a man named Pelayo, they fought not for conquest, but for survival. At Covadonga in 718, they won a victory so small the world barely noticed. Yet from that echo began 8 centuries of defiance. The north became a frontier between worlds. To the south stretched the fertile plains of al-Andalus, its palaces, its libraries, its golden cities. To the north, a harsh land of stone and rain, ruled by kings who prayed before every battle and buried their dead with their swords. Between them ran a moving border, never still, never safe. From this tension was born a new idea that reclaiming the land was not politics, but penance. Kingdoms rose from the mountains like new stars: Leon, Navarre, Aragon, Castile. Their kings called themselves defenders of Christendom, but they were also dreamers, each chasing the promise of a united Spain. They built monasteries before cities forged alliances through marriage and blood, and pushed their banners slowly south. The Reconquista was not a single war. It was a rhythm: advance, retreat, rebuild, pray. Faith gave them strength, but faith also gave them fury. For every church rebuilt, a mosque was burned. For every field reclaimed, thousands died. Still, the idea spread that Spain's destiny was divine. Along the pilgrimage route to Santiago de Compostela, travelers from across Europe carried relics, songs, and stories. The road itself became a sermon written on stone. Salvation could be earned, but only through struggle. Then came a man who blurred every line: Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar el Cid. A mercenary, a noble, a legend. He fought for both Christian and Muslim kings, his loyalty tied not to faith, but to honor. His sword carved myths that outlived him, and his story became Spain's first great epic, a tale of courage, contradiction, and survival. By the 12th century, the frontier had shifted deep into the heart of the peninsula. The kingdoms of the north grew wealthy on tribute paid by their southern rivals. The taifas of al-Andalus, once proud and rich, turned to North Africa for help. Across the strait came the Almoravids, and later the Almohads, fierce, devout, uncompromising. For a moment, the tide reversed. Cities like Lisbon and Toledo trembled as the desert winds returned. But faith alone could not save them. In 1212, on the plains of Las Navas de Tolosa, the Christian kings united under one banner. Castile, Aragon, Navarre, each rival set aside pride for one purpose. The battle raged beneath a burning sun. When it ended, the Muslim armies lay broken, and the road to the south stood open. The victory was more than military, it was spiritual. After centuries of loss, the cross had triumphed. From that day, the Reconquista became destiny. The frontier rolled ever downward through olive groves and empty mosques toward one last kingdom, Granada, the last light of al-Andalus. The bull of Altamira stirred again. Its eyes, once painted in ochre, now glowed with fire. Spain's long hunt for itself had begun. By the late 15th century, only one Muslim kingdom remained: Granada. It lay at the foot of the Sierra Nevada, its palaces gleaming like snow under the southern sun. The Alhambra was its heart marble courtyards, running water verses carved in stone. Here beauty had become defiance. While the rest of al-Andalus had vanished, Granada endured, its rulers paying gold for peace, its people surviving between tribute and hope. But in the north, 2 crowns had become one. Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, the Catholic monarchs, ruled side by side, and their union gave Spain something it had never truly known: a single purpose. The crusade that had begun with Pelayo in the mountains now had an army, a treasury, and a destiny. They called it La Santa Guerra, the Holy War. To the world it was faith. To Spain it was completion. In 1482, war returned to the south. Christian banners rolled across the plains. Cannons thundered against walls built for another age. For 10 years, Granada fought alone. Its king Boabdil, brave yet burdened, watched the city starve while factions betrayed one another. When the end came in January 1492, he rode out through the Gate of Tears and handed the keys of Granada to Ferdinand and Isabella. Behind him, the red banners of al-Andalus came down for the last time. His mother's words followed him into exile: "Weep like a woman for what you could not defend as a man." It was the closing line of 800 years. The victory was not only military, it was ideological. Spain had been reborn under one faith, one crown, one God. But unity came at a price. That same year, a royal decree ordered all Jews who refused baptism to leave the kingdom. More than 100,000 fled: merchants, doctors, poets. Their homes abandoned, their names erased. The Inquisition spread across the land, its torches burning as bright as the banners that had just risen over the Alhambra. The empire of tolerance was gone. In its place stood a nation forged by fire. Isabella and Ferdinand believed their triumph was divine confirmation. Spain had been chosen to guard the true faith and carry it to the ends of the earth. When a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus appeared at court, they saw not a dreamer, but providence. He promised a new route to Asia. They gave him ships a blessing and their flag. As his fleet slipped westward that summer, the smoke of Granada still hung over the hills. The old world was ending, and the new one was setting sail. On the same day Spain buried its past, it discovered its future. The Bull of Altamira had awoken, no longer painted in caves, but carved into empire. When Columbus returned, he carried neither silk nor spices, only stories. Islands of endless green, people who worshipped the sun, rivers glittering with gold. To Spain, weary from centuries of war, those words sounded like revelation. Within a decade, ships poured across the Atlantic like arrows. Priests carried crosses, soldiers carried swords, and the dreams of a united faith sailed with them. In the Caribbean, they built their first towns: wooden chapels, rough forts, markets heavy with salt and sugar. Then came the conquest of Mexico, led by Hernán Cortés. His army was small, his ambition immense. Against the empire of the Aztecs, he fought with steel gunpowder and alliances forged in blood. When Tenochtitlan fell in 1521, its temples burned for days. The air filled with ash and hymns. To many Spaniards, it was proof that God favored them. To others, it was the moment Spain lost its soul. In Peru, Francisco Pizarro repeated the miracle. The Inca Emperor Atahualpa was captured beneath the shadow of the Andes. To buy his freedom, he filled a room with gold. They killed him anyway. One of Pizarro's priests wrote, "We came to serve God and to get rich." It was not irony, it was prophecy. Soon, fleets of treasure ships crossed the ocean each year, their hulls bursting with silver from Potosí emeralds, from Colombia, spices from Manila. In Seville, coins clinked like rain. Churches rose higher, palaces gleamed whiter, and Europe whispered a new word: imperio. Spain, once a battlefield, now ruled half the world. Yet beneath the gold-wrought spread, the wealth did not stay. Inflation devoured it. Soldiers went unpaid, merchants went bankrupt, and farms lay empty. The more silver arrived, the poorer Spain became. Gold gilded its cathedrals and hollowed its heart. Bartolomé de las Casas, a Dominican friar, wrote from the New World. They piled the bodies like wood and called it conquest. His words reached the king, but not his conscience. Still, the dream burned on. Conquistadors planted crosses from the Andes to the Philippines. Missionaries mapped the stars while sailors mapped the seas. The Bull of Altamira, once painted in ochre, now flew on crimson sails. In the glow of its empire, Spain believed itself eternal. But even eternal things cast shadows. The gold that built its churches would fund its enemies. The faith that united it would soon divide the world. For now the sun never set on Spain, yet in its light darkness was already forming. The 16th century was Spain's age of sunlight and of smoke. From Seville to Manila, its banners ruled oceans, its priests baptized continents, and its kings believed themselves chosen. To the world, Spain was a golden empire guided by faith. But within its brilliance burned a slow and terrible fire. Philip II, son of Charles the Emperor, ruled not a country but a cosmos. He inherited lands so vast the sun could not set upon them, Castile, Naples, the Low Countries, the Americas, the Indies. He called himself the defender of Christendom, God's steward on earth. In his palace at El Escorial, stone corridors echoed with prayer and calculation. Maps covered his walls. Letters arrived from every corner of the world. His hand trembled from writing decrees, wars, marriages, purges. His faith was absolute. His trust in men was not. Under him, Spain became both monastery and machine. The Inquisition rooted out heresy with quiet precision. Heretics burned in public squares as choirs sang. Across the Atlantic, the same faith built missions and tore down temples. The empire justified everything in the name of salvation. It was unity by flame. And then the sea turned against them. In 1588, Philip launched his greatest act of faith, La Armada Invincible, the Invincible Fleet. 1,000 guns, 130 ships, a floating cathedral of war. Priests blessed the sailors before departure. The bells of Seville rang like victory already won. They sailed north toward England under banners that read, Exsurge Domine, Rise, O Lord. But blessings do not change physics. English ships were smaller, faster, and their cannons fired farther. The wind, that old pagan element, chose its side. Storms scattered the fleet before it ever reached the Channel. By autumn, wrecks washed ashore from Ireland to Norway. Spain had prayed for a miracle. Instead, it received a warning. The empire still stood vast and glittering, but something inside had cracked. Gold could no longer mask the cost. Painters like Velázquez began to show it. Kings seated in silence, their crowns heavy, their eyes lost. Even literature turned inward. Cervantes, a wounded veteran of empire, wrote of a knight who mistook memory for destiny. His Don Quixote tilted at windmills just as Spain tilted at fate. Yet the illusion persisted. Cathedrals still rose, galleons still sailed, and the faithful still believed. Spain had conquered the world but could not conquer itself. Its triumph had become its tragedy, a glory so bright it blinded those who carried it. The sun still burned over the empire, but now its light fell through dust. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled over Europe. A new storm was coming, one no prayer could turn. After the Armada's ruin, Spain's golden world dimmed but did not die. The crown tightened its grip. Priests prayed louder, and artists painted harder, as if beauty itself could drown out decline. The court of Philip III glittered with ceremony, but hollowed inside. Coins were scarce. Honor was not. The empire had become an illusion sustained by ritual and pride. Yet even decay can create masterpieces. In the quiet halls of Madrid, Diego Velázquez captured what words could not. Kings stared from his canvases like ghosts who knew their time was ending. Servants, jesters, and dwarfs shared the same light as monarchs, his brush-dissolving hierarchy revealing the weariness beneath the crown. Through him, Spain's soul painted its own confession. Outside the palace, war never stopped. The Dutch fought for freedom. The French tested Spain's fading might. Armies marched not for faith, but for survival. In the fields of Flanders, Spanish tercios died by the thousands under cold rain. The gold that had built cathedrals now bought gunpowder. Every victory felt smaller, every loss heavier. Within Spain itself, famine crept. The mines of the New World poured silver no more. Ships sank, pirates thrived. Inflation turned bread into luxury. The common people carried a faith deeper than the clergy's, a belief that suffering itself was holy. In churches, candles burned beside starving peasants. Heaven felt nearer than justice. Then came a painter who no longer sought grace, but truth. Francisco Goya watched the last Bourbon kings preside over a country asleep in ritual. His canvases screamed where priests stayed silent, black skies, twisted faces, nightmares of reason. Where Velázquez had shown dignity, Goya showed despair. The light of Spain had turned inward, its faith devouring itself. By the turn of the 19th century, the empire that once ruled the seas was drowning in memory. Napoleon's armies would soon march across its borders, and the world would watch an old power shatter in slow motion. The bull of Altamira, once carved in glory, now staggered wounded through its own smoke. Its horns still glowed, but only from the fire consuming it. In 1808, the thunder that had rolled across Europe finally reached Spain. Napoleon's legions crossed the Pyrenees under banners of enlightenment and empire. They promised order, reason, and reform, but brought only chains. King Charles IV abdicated his son Ferdinand imprisoned, and Napoleon placed his brother Joseph on the Spanish throne. To Paris it was politics. To Spain it was blasphemy. The reaction was instant and feral. In Madrid, crowds rose without plan or leader. On the 2nd of May, mothers threw tiles from rooftops, monks carried knives, and peasants fought cavalry in the streets. By nightfall, the city was a graveyard. The next morning, French troops lined up the prisoners against a wall and shot them. Goya painted it later, white shirts glowing like ghosts in the dark faces twisted between terror and defiance. His brush turned history into witness. The Peninsular War had begun the first great war of the people. Spain became a battlefield of villages, not armies. Guerrillas struck from forests and vanished into hills. Farmers hid muskets under plows. Priests carried bullets with their rosaries. The French held the cities, but the countryside belonged to rage. Every road was an ambush, every church a fortress. In their defiance, Spain discovered something it had never truly possessed: the idea of the nation. By 1814, the French were gone, leaving a land in ruin and a people unwilling to kneel again. But freedom came tangled. Liberal juntas called for a constitution. Generals demanded order. The king returned blind to both. Ferdinand VII abolished the new laws, restored absolutism, and filled the prisons with those who had fought for him. Spain had driven out the invader only to invite back tyranny. The 19th century unfolded like a long argument. Revolts flared, reforms died, and civil wars, the Carlist Wars, bled the country again and again. Each side claimed God. Each side buried sons. The dream of unity that had driven the Reconquista now split Spain along invisible lines: liberal and royalist faith and freedom, past and future. Still, amid the chaos, the pulse of modernity began. Railways cut through mountains, newspapers spread ideas, and artists turned their gaze toward the people. The empire was gone, but a nation was trying to be born. Goya's black paintings faded into the earth, but his question remained: could Spain exist without an empire, or was empire the only language it knew? By century's end, the answer had not yet come. The bull of Altamira was wounded, scarred, but standing. Its breath steamed in the dark, waiting for the dawn of another century, one that would test its endurance once again. By the dawn of the 20th century, Spain was old and tired, a ghost in its own empire. For 400 years it had ruled oceans, but now even its maps betrayed it. Cuba rebelled. The Philippines burned. Generations raised under the shadow of glory now fought against it. The dream that began with Columbus was collapsing under its own weight. In 1898, war came again, short, brutal, and final. The United States sank Spain's fleet at Santiago Bay. Manila fell within weeks. When the Treaty of Paris was signed, Spain surrendered its last colonies. Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, gone. The empire that once circled the world ended in a single signature. Spaniards called it el Desastre del 98, the disaster of 98. The loss was more than territorial. It was spiritual. What was Spain without its empire? Cities fell silent, ships rusted in harbor, and soldiers returned to no purpose. Writers searched for meaning in the wreckage Unamuno Azorin Machado. They called themselves La Generación del 98 and wrote like mourners at a funeral. Spain is dead, one said, but her body still walks. And yet from the ruin came reflection. The nation turned inward toward its fields, its mountains, its language. New painters captured peasants instead of kings. New poets sang of dust instead of gold. The country rediscovered its poverty and its pride. It began to ask not what had we ruled, but who are we? But memory has sharp teeth. The old divisions, church and republic, faith and freedom, still waited beneath the surface. When the monarchy faltered again, the people filled the vacuum. In 1931, Spain became a republic, the first in its long history. Hope returned bright and fragile as morning light. For a few years it seemed that the bull might finally rest. Then the drums began. Old generals whispered of order, priests preached of obedience, and the republic splintered between left and right, rich and poor. The century that had opened with the death of empire would close with something darker, the war for Spain's very soul. The summer of 1936 began with speeches and ended with gunfire. Spain was divided not by borders, but by belief. In Madrid and Barcelona, workers marched under red flags demanding land and equality. In the countryside, priests warned that the world itself was falling into sin. When a group of generals rose in rebellion against the Republic, the country split clean down the middle. It was not a war of nations. It was a war of neighbors. Cities became battlefields. Brothers fought brothers. Priests were hanged from church towers. Entire villages vanished under bombardment. The Republicans fought for progress and democracy. The Nationalists for faith, order, and tradition. Each side believed they were saving Spain. Each burned it in their own image. Foreign powers poured in. Germany and Italy sent planes and tanks to Franco's army, testing the weapons they would soon unleash on Europe. From the other side, the Soviet Union sent rifles and advisors. Volunteers from around the world, poets, students, dock workers came to fight fascism in a land they had never seen. George Orwell wrote, "In Spain, I saw the future, and it was bleeding." The war was chaos carved into geography. Madrid resisted under siege, its streets reduced to rubble. In Guernica, German bombers erased an entire town in a single afternoon. The flames twisted upward in the shape of a bull. Picasso painted it later in black and white, a cry frozen on canvas. His Guernica became the war's conscience, the moment Spain's tragedy became the world's. By 1939, the Republic lay in ruins. The last defenders crossed the border into France, refugees carrying nothing but ashes and fear. Franco's army marched through Madrid in triumph, their boots echoing on broken streets. The war had lasted 3 years. It had killed 500,000 people. It had ended the Spanish Republic and buried an entire generation's faith in progress. The guns fell silent, but the silence was not peace. It was paralysis. The world was about to burn in global war, yet Spain withdrew into itself, wounded, suspicious, unyielding. The bull of Altamira, once a symbol of creation, now lay carved in stone again, mute, immovable, scarred by fire. When the smoke of civil war cleared, Spain did not rebuild, it froze. Francisco Franco, the general who had promised salvation, became El Caudillo, the ruler of a broken land. His victory brought order, but it was the order of a locked room. Newspapers spoke in whispers. Neighbors feared their own voices. Across the country, 1,000,000 wounds were sealed beneath silence. Franco's Spain was a paradox, devout, yet brutal, modern, yet medieval. The church returned to power, blessing a government that governed by fear. Propaganda films showed tidy streets, smiling families, flags fluttering under blue skies. Beyond the frame, hunger stalked the villages. Children grew up reciting prayers for the dictator's health. Books vanished, names vanished. The nation became a mausoleum disguised as a miracle. For years the world looked away. Then came the Second World War, and Spain stood still, neutral in politics, complicit in spirit. Franco watched Europe burn and learned its lessons, how to survive every victor. When Hitler fell, he condemned fascism. When the Cold War began, he condemned communism. He offered Washington his ports and offered God his loyalty. In return, the West forgave his sins. By the 1950s, the country began to stir again, slowly, warily. American dollars built highways and hotels. Tourists arrived chasing sun and cheap wine. Spain opened its shutters, but not its windows. Beneath the surface, a generation born after the war began to breathe differently. They listened to foreign music, read banned books, and whispered about democracy. Franco's Spain was aging, and history was patient. When the dictator appeared in public, his uniform seemed to wear him. His speeches were slower, his eyes lost in memory. He had ruled for decades, outlived his enemies, and silenced his critics. But even mountains erode. By the early 1970s, his empire of fear was collapsing under its own weight. The people still clapped when he waved, but their applause sounded like rain on an empty plaza. The nation waited. not for revolution, for breath. The bull of Altamira slept again motionless beneath the stone of its own making, while the air above it filled with the quiet before dawn. In November 1975, Francisco Franco died in a hospital bed surrounded by doctors, priests, and silence. He had ruled for nearly 40 years, outliving the century that made him. When his heart finally stopped, the nation he had built did not cheer, it exhaled. The radio announced his passing in a trembling voice, calling him Caudillo de España, por la gracia de Dios. Outside, people wept, prayed, or simply stared. No one quite knew what came next. For a few days, Spain felt suspended between past and future. Franco's coffin lay in the Valley of the Fallen beneath a cross taller than the pyramids. Soldiers saluted, priests chanted, but the crowd's mourning was thin. Beneath the ritual ran an undercurrent of disbelief, not grief, but release. The age of silence had ended, but the language of freedom had yet to return. Into that vacuum stepped a young king, Juan Carlos, chosen by Franco himself as heir. The generals expected obedience. The church expected continuity. Instead, the king began to do something unthinkable. He changed nothing on the surface, yet everything beneath it. Within months, political prisoners were freed exiles, invited home, and new parties legalized. Spain began to breathe again. In 1977, the country held its first free election since the Civil War. Streets that had once echoed with gunfire now filled with banners and applause. Former enemies, monarchists, Republicans, socialists, took seats side by side in the new parliament. The wounds had not healed, but the nation chose to walk despite them. A year later, a constitution was written. Spain would be a parliamentary monarchy built on liberty and justice. It was more than law. It was an act of resurrection. Yet the ghosts lingered. In barracks and churches, whispers spread that democracy was weakness. On the night of February 23, 1981, a group of officers stormed the parliament with guns shouting for order in the name of the old Spain. Deputies ducked beneath their desks as bullets tore the ceiling. For hours, the country teetered on the edge of return. Then on national television, King Juan Carlos appeared in uniform, calm and unyielding, ordering the rebels to stand down. They obeyed. The dictatorship had died twice, once in flesh, once in fear. When dawn came, people poured into the streets. They sang, they cried, they laughed. After centuries of conquest, crusade, and control, Spain had chosen something rarer: mercy. The bull of Altamira opened its eyes once more, not in rage, but in quiet wonder. It had survived everything, and at last it was free to rest. Franco's shadow lingered, but the sun rose anyway. The Spain that entered the 1980s was unsteady young and hungry for color. Democracy did not come as a march of banners. It came like spring after a long frost, slow, uncertain, unstoppable. The world watched in disbelief. A country once synonymous with censorship and civil war was now rewriting itself. Censorship fell. Music exploded. Artists, filmmakers, and poets flooded Madrid's nightclubs in what became known as La Movida Madrileña, a rebellion of rhythm and paint, laughter and light. What guns had silenced, guitars revived. Spain's youth danced on the grave of fear, and for the first time in generations they looked forward, not back. Politics followed art. In 1982, a new government led by Felipe González brought modernization and reform. Spain opened its borders, joined NATO, and 4 years later entered the European community, no longer an isolated relic, but a voice in Europe's chorus. Construction cranes replaced tanks. Airports replaced checkpoints. Cities grew, and the language of the nation changed from command to conversation. Yet the past did not vanish. Under new plazas and highways lay mass graves, fathers and sons still missing from the war. Families searched fields with shovels and prayers. The government urged reconciliation. Silence remained the easier piece. Spain had chosen democracy, but memory took longer. Still, the rebirth was undeniable. In 1992, the world turned its eyes to Spain again, to Barcelona's Olympics, Seville's World Expo, and Madrid's celebration as European capital of culture. The same land that once burned for faith now burned with light. The nation that had walled itself in for centuries had become a bridge between continents, between old and new. But history never ends. It hums beneath the present. From the caves of Altamira to the plazas of Madrid, from empire to ashes to rebirth, Spain remained what it had always been, a story written, erased, and written again. The bull endured, scarred but alive, watching centuries pass. It had seen gods rise and kings fall, heard the prayers of conquerors and the songs of the conquered. Through it all, it never bowed. Spain's light returned not as glory, but as grace. The grace of endurance, of learning to live with its ghosts. Empires die, faiths fade, but the land remembers. From the ochre of Altamira to the silver of modern skylines, the same truth remains. This is a country born from fire, reborn from its own ruins, and still impossibly dancing in the light. 5,000 years after the first handprints were pressed against the stone of Altamira, Spain, still carries the warmth of that touch. Its story has never been linear. It circles, collapses, and renews. Empires rise like tides, then withdraw, leaving behind the salt of memory. Through every age, one constant endures, the stubborn living pulse of a land that refuses to forget. Today, Spain's plazas ring with laughter, not sermons. Its churches echo beside cafes, its cathedrals stand beside skyscrapers. On the streets of Granada, Arabic whispers still mingle with Spanish song. In Barcelona, artists carve sunlight from glass. In the Basque Hills, the rain still falls on stones older than kings. Every voice, every shadow, every silence all belong to the same long conversation. The ghosts have not gone. They have learned to coexist. In museums hang the visions of Goya and Picasso, mirrors to the soul of a nation that once tore itself apart. In classrooms, children read the words of poets exiled or executed, their verses, now part of the same heritage once denied them. The Bull of Altamira endures in every flag waved at festivals, every dance, every heartbeat. Spain's story was never one of perfection. It was one of persistence. It is the tale of a people who survived faith and fire gold, and grief empire, and emptiness, and still found beauty in the ruins. To walk its streets today is to walk upon layers of time, to feel the tremor of those who came before, and to know that history here does not sleep. As the sun sets over Toledo, the city glows like molten metal light, sliding across rooftops once Roman, once Moorish, once Christian, now simply human. Bells ring in the distance. A child laughs. And somewhere in the caves of the north, the ancient bull still watches, painted in ochre, waiting for the next generation to look up and remember. Because Spain was never just a kingdom. It was and remains a memory made flesh, a land that remembers what the world forgets.